When an old man's only key to his late wife's cherished memories shatters, despair grips his heart. But through the wisdom of a teacher and the forging of something new, he discovers that broken things can lead to unbreakable hope. Will the new key unlock more than just a chest? The journey had been long, the road stretching endlessly through fields of golden wheat that shimmered in the sunlight. Jesus and his disciples traveled together, their sandals kicking up dust as they made their way toward the next village. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wildflowers, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. The disciples had grown accustomed to these quiet moments, finding solace in the presence of their teacher. But as they approached the village, a change in the atmosphere was palpable. The fields gave way to narrow dirt paths lined with modest homes, their walls cracked and weathered by time. A heavy stillness hung in the air, as if the village itself bore the weight of unspoken sorrows. The villagers moved about their daily tasks, but their movements were slow, their faces downcast. A woman drew water from a well, her hands trembling as she struggled with the heavy bucket. A child sat by the roadside, tracing patterns in the dust with a stick, his eyes devoid of the light that usually danced in a child's gaze. The disciples exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the heaviness of the place. John, ever perceptive, leaned closer to Peter and whispered, "There's something here, something I can't quite name." Peter shrugged, his brow furrowed. "It feels as though this village has forgotten how to hope." Jesus walked ahead of them, his expression serene but thoughtful. His presence seemed to cast a gentle light over the somber scene, as if he carried the promise of renewal in his very being. Finally he spoke, his voice soft yet commanding. "This village carries a burden. Let us walk among them, for there is a reason we were brought here." The disciples nodded, falling into step behind him, their curiosity mingling with a growing sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, they trusted that Jesus would lead them to it. They had not walked far when they noticed an elderly man sitting beneath the withered branches of a tree that seemed as weary as he was. The man's shoulders were hunched, his thin frame shrouded in a tattered cloak. His hands, gnarled with age, clutched a rusted lock and a broken key. He stared at them as though they were the last remnants of a world he could no longer touch. The disciples hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but Jesus moved forward with quiet determination, his eyes full of compassion. "Peace be with you," Jesus said, his voice a balm against the old man's visible sorrow. The man looked up, startled as if he had not heard a kind word in years. His eyes, clouded with age and grief, searched Jesus' face for a moment before he responded. "And also with you, stranger," he said, his voice hoarse and trembling. "What brings you to this forgotten corner of the world?" Jesus knelt beside him, unbothered by the dust that clung to his robes. "We are travelers," he said simply, "but it seems we have found someone in need. Tell me what troubles your heart." For a moment, the old man was silent, as if the weight of his sorrow had rendered him unable to speak. Then he held up the broken key, its jagged edges catching the light. "This," he said, his voice breaking. "This key was the only way to open the chest my wife left behind when she passed. Inside are her letters, her keepsakes, everything that remains of her. The key broke, and now it feels as though she is gone all over again." The disciples, moved by the man's pain, stood quietly, their hearts heavy with empathy. Peter, always eager to help, stepped forward. "Perhaps we can find a blacksmith," but Jesus raised a hand, silencing him gently. His gaze remained fixed on the old man, and his voice was calm and certain. "There is more to this than a broken key," he said. "Let us sit together, and I will tell you a story." The disciples and the old man settled beneath the tree, the dappled sunlight casting a warm glow over their small circle. The village seemed to fade away, as if the weight of its sorrows had been momentarily lifted. Jesus sat with a quiet grace, his hands folded in his lap. When he began to speak, his voice carried a rhythm that seemed to draw the very air around them closer, pulling them into the story. "There was once a young woman," Jesus began, who worked as a caretaker in a great mansion. She was entrusted with a single key, a beautiful object that unlocked every door in the house. 4 years she carried out her duties faithfully, her key a symbol of her purpose and trust. As Jesus spoke, the disciples could picture the woman clearly, a figure of diligence and pride, moving through the grand halls of the mansion with her key in hand. But one day, Jesus continued, as she hurried to open the kitchen door, the key broke in the lock. She was devastated, for without the key she believed she could no longer fulfill her responsibilities. She sat on the floor of the kitchen and wept, her tears a reflection of her despair. The old man leaned forward, his weathered face wrapped with attention. The story seemed to echo the struggles of his own heart, and he hung on every word. Jesus paused, letting the weight of the woman's sorrow settle over them before he continued. Desperate, the woman sought the advice of the blacksmith. He was a wise and patient man, and he told her, "This key is broken, yes, but its purpose is not gone. Let us make a new key, one stronger than the last, forged from the very piece that failed." As Jesus described how the blacksmith worked with the woman to create a new key, the old man's eyes filled with tears. The disciples too seemed deeply moved, as though the story spoke to something they each carried within themselves. When Jesus finished, a profound silence followed, the kind that speaks louder than words. The old man led Jesus and the disciples back to his cottage, clutching the newly forged key as though it were a treasure. His steps were steadier now, his back a little straighter, as if the act of forging a new key had kindled a spark of hope within him. The disciples followed in silence, sensing the gravity of the moment. Outside, the late afternoon sun bathed the village in warm, golden light, casting long shadows on the ground. It seemed as if the world itself held its breath. Inside the old man's home, the chest sat in its corner, waiting. The room was filled with an expectant silence, broken only by the soft creak of the wooden floor as they gathered around the chest. The old man knelt beside it, his hands trembling as he inserted the new key into the lock. For a moment, he hesitated, his breath catching in his throat. "What if it doesn't work?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. "What if I've lost her forever?" Jesus knelt beside him, his presence a calming force. "Have faith," he said gently. "This key is more than just a tool. It is a symbol of your love and resilience. Trust that it will open not only this lock but also your heart to new beginnings." The old man nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. With a deep breath he turned the key. There was a faint click and then the lock released. The old man let out a shaky laugh, a sound filled with both relief and disbelief. Slowly he lifted the lid of the chest. Inside, the treasures of his wife's life lay untouched. Letters tied with ribbon, a delicate lace handkerchief, a silver locket etched with their initials. He picked up a letter and ran his fingers over the familiar handwriting. Tears streamed down his face as he held the locket, opening it to reveal a tiny portrait of himself and his wife, their younger faces smiling back at him. "She's still here," he whispered, clutching the locket to his chest. "I thought I'd lost her, but she's still here." The disciples stood in quiet reverence, their hearts moved by the old man's joy. Peter wiped at his eyes, murmuring, "It's beautiful." As the old man sorted through the items in the chest, Jesus turned to the disciples. His gaze was steady, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "Do you see what has happened here?" he asked. The broken key was not the end of the story. It was an invitation to create something new, something stronger. The disciples nodded, each reflecting on the meaning of his words. Thomas, who often wrestled with doubt, spoke up. "But Master, what if the blacksmith had not been able to forge a new key? What then?" Jesus smiled, his expression patient. "Even when the path seems blocked, there is always a way forward. God's grace is infinite, and His solutions are beyond our understanding. The key is not the object itself but the willingness to seek and trust." The old man looked up from his treasures, his tear-streaked face radiant with gratitude. "You are right, teacher. This new key has not only opened the chest, it has opened my heart. I see now that my wife's love was never locked away. It has been with me all along. Jesus placed a hand on the old man's shoulder. And now you can carry her memory with joy, not sorrow. Let this chest remind you of her love, but do not let it bind you. Life is meant to move forward, carrying the lessons and love of the past into the future. That evening, the group shared a simple meal with the old man, his spirits visibly lifted. He spoke of his wife, recounting stories of her warmth, her laughter, and her skill as a locksmith. The disciples listened intently, their own hearts touched by his journey. As the night deepened, they gathered outside beneath a sky scattered with stars. The air was cool and filled with the chirping of crickets. Peter broke the silence, his voice thoughtful. "Master, I've been thinking about what you said. About broken keys. There was a time when I thought my life as a fisherman was all I had. When I left my nets to follow you, it felt like losing the key to my own life. But now, I see that you were leading me to something greater." Jesus smiled, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "Every journey begins with a loss, Peter. To follow me you had to leave something behind. But what you gain is far greater than what you lose." John nodded, his voice soft. "I think we all carry broken keys, moments when we felt lost or inadequate. But tonight, I've learned that even those moments are part of God's plan." Jesus looked at each of them, his gaze filled with love. "Remember this, when one door closes, another opens. And when a key breaks, trust that God will provide another way." The next morning, the group prepared to leave the village. The old man stood at his door, the newly forged key hanging on a chain around his neck. His smile was brighter than the morning sun, his eyes filled with a peace that had been absent for so long. "You've given me more than a new key," he said, his voice steady and full of gratitude. "You've given me a new way to see the world. Thank you, teacher." Jesus placed a hand on the old man's head in blessing. "Your journey does not end here, my friend. Share what you have learned. Let your story inspire others to seek new paths when their own keys fail." As they walked away, the disciples felt a renewed sense of purpose. The village, once shrouded in sorrow, seemed brighter now, as if the old man's joy had spread to every corner. The broken key, once a symbol of despair, had become a testament to resilience and hope. Peter turned to Jesus, his voice filled with awe. "Master, your words have changed that man's life. And they've changed mine too. I will carry this lesson with me always." Jesus smiled, his steps sure and steady as they journeyed onward. The lesson of the broken key is for all who have ears to hear. Trust in God, seek new solutions, and never lose faith. For every lock, there is a key, and for every broken heart, there is healing. And so they walked forward, their hearts light, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that with faith and perseverance, even the most broken things could be made whole again. This is end of the story. Comment Amen if you believe in Jesus' blessings. Please like this video and subscribe this channel for more Jesus story like this. May the God watch over you.